Welcome back to Weekends with Alex Witt. The streets of Ferguson are calm, but the city remains on edge. Police are investigating the shooting and wounding of 2 police officers at a protest in the overnight hours early Thursday. 2/3 of Ferguson's population is African American, and in recent months, many have sought to understand the experiences and attitudes of those residents. But what about the 1/3 of Ferguson residents who are white? Had they now have the protests and this week's DOJ report detailing racial bias by town and police officials? How's that affected how they feel about their city? MSNBC's Amanda Sakuma got their view.
I've seen a lot of things happen, a lot of things change.
Tana Coffer has lived in Ferguson for the last 50 years.
I've seen the city sort of slide down and then rejuvenate itself. It's a small town.
Tana now volunteers at the I Love Ferguson shop, a community store and public space just steps from where protesters have gathered since the shooting of Michael Brown. Many white residents like Tana say they were not aware of the depth of racial tensions in Ferguson until the unarmed black teen's shooting by a white police officer.
For a long time, I actually wasn't aware there was so much unhappiness. And I feel very bad about that. I think I should have been. I thought I was involved, and apparently I wasn't involved enough.
Questions of racial tensions were at the forefront of a city council candidates forum this week, just after 2 police officers were shot on the footsteps of the Ferguson Police Department.
Obviously, you can cut the tension with a knife.
An audience of mostly white residents gathered to meet the candidates 1 month ahead of the upcoming local elections. Many questions were raised over how public officials should mend race relations.
It's just been very hard the last few months to be able to find a way to sit down with each other. And I'm hoping that as time goes on that the tension will dissipate, and maybe that will give us a chance to really talk.
Many residents say they're searching for a way to make those conversations happen, but it hasn't been easy.
You do sit and you talk to your neighbor and you talk to someone else and you get a completely different view of something that you had absolutely no clue about. And that, to me, is amazing.
And that was MSNBC's Amanda Sakuma reporting. Let's bring in right now Jason Johnson, professor of political science at Hiram College, and Melissa Harris-Perry, who needs no introduction if you're watching about, I don't know, 35 minutes ago, host of Melissa Harris-Perry right here on MSNBC. All right, Jason, we'll speak with you first here. How surprised are you that so many white citizens of Ferguson were unaware of what's been going on around them?
I'm not shocked at all. And that goes back to my experiences when I was in Ferguson. I went to the First Baptist Church. It was a majority white meeting, and most of the residents there were more concerned with how Ferguson looked than whether or not there were actually problems on the ground. There were people there who were saying, I only go to the black part of town to buy wings. That's a quote. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are that oblivious as to what their own police department was doing to their black neighbors.
So, Melissa, how do you get to solutions when you've got some that aren't even acknowledging a problem, whether it's out of ignorance or just not being aware or intentionally not acknowledging? But how do you get to the solution?
Well, I mean, part of what I heard there was people who had goodwill. And I think, to me, this is part of what's really important as we talk about what manifestations of racial inequality are. Because I think if we begin with the presumption that racial inequality can only exist when there is ill will, when people want to oppress and keep other folks down. But what I heard mostly from the white citizens, I didn't know, and I mostly have goodwill. If in a circumstance of lack of knowledge and general goodwill, you can still have the kinds of clear practices of racial inequality that we saw, then we cannot solve it. As much as I think it is important to have the conversations, we actually can't solve it through interpersonal conversations. We're going to have to do the work that the DOJ report is already beginning there in Ferguson, which is to structurally dismantle the ways in which that inequality is being reproduced by the policies of that department.
Yeah, very good point there. But we do talk so much, Jason, this disconnect between the white community and African-American neighbors. I mean, obviously, it's not unique to just Ferguson. How prevalent, if you can put some qualifier here, how prevalent do you think this is, and how can there begin to be better understanding? Because we all talk about this. I've talked about this with Melissa before. I've talked about it with you before. We're doing it on national television.
Well, I think it's incredibly prevalent. I mean, you can see it in Cleveland, you can see it in Pittsburgh, you can see it in cities all over the country where there is, you know, people can have the best intentions in the world, but they don't necessarily want to take responsibility when actual facts and data have been placed in front of them. You look at some of the community forums that they've been having for the candidates. You've got Brian Fletcher, who's the former mayor, who's like, well, I don't really think this is a problem. You've got other people running for ward positions in city council in Ferguson who are saying, well, you know, I think the DOJ report is just a bunch of statistics. So I think what needs to happen, in all honesty, talking is fine. That entire department needs to be eliminated. They need to start from scratch and rehire better people. And I think that's something that can be done in a lot of departments across the United States of America.
Yeah, I'm going to explain that graphic that people just saw, those cities that were highlighted across the country, because this was almost lost in the heat of the moment over the shootings Thursday. This announcement by the AG, Eric Holder. Let's take a listen.
We have selected 6 cities to serve as pilot sites for innovative strategies to strengthen bonds between police and the citizens that they serve. By helping to develop programs that serve their own diverse experiences, these cities will stand on the leading edge of our effort to confront pressing issues in communities really across the country.
How daunting a task in these 6 cities across the country. You're trying to build trust between police and their communities.
Well, it's so important that you put it in that context of there was the DOJ had already planned this announcement, but the night before there was the shooting of the 2 officers, and it was almost lost, right? In part because it began to shift the narrative. Eric Holder's tenure as Attorney General is an interesting case study of this. In 2009, he got in a lot of trouble for the nation of cowards conversation, but part of what he said there is, look, we have trouble talking to each other. Right. And in fact, I had a critique because I was like, I don't want my Attorney General to talk. I want my Attorney General to sue somebody, right? You're the Attorney General.
Action.
But in fact, that's precisely what his tenure has done. As much as conversation has been sort of the engine that I think drives our interpersonal experience of this inequality, this Attorney General and this Department of Justice has been very, very focused on structural change. And the fact that as he goes, as Loretta Lynch hopefully will be confirmed, you see them taking real action across the country in ways that hopefully will bear fruit on, as you pointed out here, Alex, something that is very hard but requires systemic efforts to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, I want to switch topics. Of course, you know what's coming here, this racially charged incident, the racist fraternity video by the University of Oklahoma students. You both teach on college campuses. So first up to you, Jason, how surprised were you with this behavior from these SAE frat boys?
I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, you see this sort of thing. I'm sure Melissa has stories as well. There are things that you hear from your students. There are behaviors that you can actually observe on your own. But what impressed me about all of this, Alex, to be perfectly honest, is somebody snitched. There was a kid on that bus who clearly saw this behavior and put his own risk, his own behavior, and his own fraternity at risk to say, I'm going to report this because I think it's wrong. So I think it's a sign of progress, even in the midst of that racist behavior.
How about, Melissa, the decision to expel the students? Was that a good idea?
Well, I want to be careful here because it may be in this one case, and as much as we're digging into it in the media, there still may be things that I don't know about what previous relationships these students may have had. But in general, as a teacher, I am not a fan of expulsion. Only because if you have done something, if you have a set of beliefs and opinions that I think are deeply problematic, then if I believe in education, if I believe in the power of what my college can do, and I think my college is not in line with that, I don't want to send you away. I actually want to draw you closer. But again, since I don't know what the disciplinary record of these individual students were, I can't speak directly to whether or not expulsion was right. But in general, I would prefer not to expel people. I would prefer to engage them.
Yeah, and Jason's obviously agreeing with you. And I'm so right there with you. These teachable moments where you can continue educating, you know, these students. Keep them in the classroom.
It's different if it's a crime. I mean, so I want to be really clear. This is not the same claim I would make about Title IX, about sexual assault, about rape. Those are very, very different claims. But in the case of, and again, part of it for me is when 20-year-olds behave badly and say appalling things, it always creates for me first curiosity. How do they, why? And so for me, the why is almost always about the environment we as adults have created for them. And so to me, it creates introspection.
Okay.
And I just want And I just want to add this, you know, I completely agree with Melissa, not just from the freedom of speech standpoint, from the educational standpoint, from the, you know, you're not going to eliminate the problem by letting them go off and just be bitter. But I view it very differently from the standpoint of the SAE Fraternity. They have a right as a private organization to shut down that chapter if they think that's a bad reflection on them. I think that's different from what the university has done.
I would agree.
Okay. Well, Jason, good to see you. And Melissa, thanks for the OT. Now you get your lunch break. Good to see you guys. Of course, you can all catch Melissa every weekend.